Hey everyone, welcome back to OTD Military History. We are back with our first guest live stream, and I'm not sure how long. It's been a while. I think since like summer, the heat of in the depths of the hot summer. And because some of you know, me and my wife got a puppy. He's with me currently, but he is sleeping, sort of staring at me while sleeping. So hopefully he keeps quiet and doesn't go too crazy. Maybe I can bring him out at the end because I'll have to take him out anyway towards the end. Hopefully it gives us about the good hour that we need. So that's good to know. Or sorry, good to go there on that front. I ran him outside. Hopefully he's nice and tired. So today, I'm really looking forward to this one. This one I've been trying to get going, and it's my fault. I didn't get planned earlier because of the puppy. I'm just going to keep blaming Muggins. That's his name is. But I'm really interested in this one. So today we have Jonathan Washington on talking about the Mounted Cavalry with straight up horses fighting in Syria, the Levant, in the Second World War. Like, this isn't first. I was just telling Jonathan, looking at the slides, and I'm like, this is the wrong war. This doesn't feel right. So I think that'll keep in mind. I know this is an area not a ton of people have a lot of knowledge on. Vichy is confusing. The fighting in the Levant is confusing for those of you who aren't really into it. So if we have questions for Jonathan, fire away at any time, and I'll parcel them in when I can. But other than that, let's get things started. So, Jonathan, thanks for coming on the channel. I really appreciate it, and you bringing this really interesting topic on for us.
Thanks for having me, Brad. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, it's no, it's my pleasure. Like I said, it's confusing. I'm going to say that word a lot probably today because it is. The pictures confuse me. The topic confuses me. I mean, we're already getting some confusion about where it even is. So this is what the current Middle East, so Syria, Lebanon, and I think that's it, right? Parts of Jordan, maybe Israel.
No. Well, I mean, I suppose we can clarify that to start off with. The campaign was launched against this Vichy French held colony, which was called Syria,
right?
Which is modern day Syria and Lebanon, and Lebanon was part of the same polity. It was the southern part of French Syria.
Yeah, so I think that helps because that makes perfect sense. I didn't know if there was borders and raids, whatever. We'll get into it because I know there's a lot of space to maneuver in that part of the world. So as we've already talked about, and a lot of people know, we have some new people on. So thanks for those who've never been here before. So thanks for coming on for this new topic in a different area for me on the channel. Haven't really talked about the Middle East and this area at all, really. So Jonathan, as I always ask everybody, why this topic? But I mean, your answer's got to be really fascinating because this, I don't even know how this comes up, to be honest with you.
Okay, yeah, fair question. And I suppose it becomes, just to muddy the waters further, I wasn't even a World War II historian at the time I stumbled across it.
Wow.
I was at a friend's house, and I saw this coffee table book, and it was Jan Piekalkovich's The Cavalry World War II. I've got one of the slides. You'll see the front cover.
Just 1 second. Let me get that fired up for us.
Next slide. Yeah, that's it. And I knew that the Soviets had used cavalry in World War II. I vaguely remembered seeing a couple of pictures of German cavalry. The Germans instantly used cavalry in the invasion of Poland as well.
Yep.
And just flicking through it, so I started flicking through it, and flicking through it, I was amazed to see these pictures of American cavalry, Japanese cavalry, French cavalry, you name it, and British cavalry. I thought, well, why on earth would you bother taking photos of soldiers training? And it wasn't photos of soldiers training; it was photos of British soldiers on horses and operations. There wasn't much on it. There was only a couple of columns and kind of newspaper speak.
Yeah.
But that immediately triggered my interest, and I went back home that night and started as everyone does, using Wikipedia. Couldn't find anything on it. Right. Maybe like a few lines in one of the regimental histories. That was it. And it was a disappointment to find that there was nothing on it. It was on such a subject. It was so weird and so interesting. And about a year later, I had time in my hands because my wife got promoted and that shipped us out to Slovakia. And our youngest was too young to go to school, so I was going to be looking after him. And he napped about 3 hours a day, so that was a lot of time twiddling my thumbs. So I used the time to write this book. Basically, did the first draft of it.
Wow, cool. So yeah, I saw you got. There's another. Oh yeah, this photo.
Yeah, that's one of the photos from the book.
Okay.
So apologies to the publisher. That's obviously a German soldier camouflaging his horse. The Germans used cavalry all the way through World War II. At one point, Hitler ordered them to be disbanded. And then a year later, they realized they made a terrible mistake and they had to reinstate them. But at that point, all their cavalry had been converted into panzers and lost at Stalingrad. So they had to recruit anti-communist Cossacks because they still needed the capability.
Right. Yeah. So sorry, I'm still taken by this camouflage and kind of what they thought that would accomplish. But I thought it might have been from Africa. I don't know, because it looks like a zebra. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, and what we've got there is a Cheshire Yeoman, and you can tell that's not World War One, hopefully anyway, because there's a radio. Always, he's got the field telephone, obviously for wire. There's also an antenna, and so straight away that makes it World War Two. I think that's in the UK actually, but he's wearing quite heavy clothing there, and that's one of the examples. A photo of one of the unit which probably did most of the fighting from a mounted point of view in World War II, right. Which I'll come to in a minute. If you go on to the next slide, I had a connection with the Yeomanry, as you see from these pictures. I was in the Scottish Yeomanry, which then amalgamated to form the Queen's Own Yeomanry. We were at Nijmegen marches, and posing of the right. And so I understood the way yeomanry organisations work. And to clarify that, the yeomanry are Britain's territorial army cavalry. Now it's now called the Army Reserve, but at the time it's called the TA. And when it originated way back in the Napoleonic Wars, and it was raised as this part-time militia cavalry. And the deal was that they would train a couple of weekends a month, and if the French ever invaded, they would jump on their farm horses, put on their uniforms, and pick up their sabres and go and fight them. And that never happened, apart from Vinegar Hill in Ireland. And they weren't called upon to do active service until the Boer War, when a unit of volunteers was raised as a composite unit, and then again in World War One, obviously. And then at the end of World War One, during which time most of them have been converted into cyclists or infantry, or mounted infantry, which makes it even more confusing, but rather than cavalry. At the end of World War One, the authorities accept that they're going to phase out cavalry. This is the British High Command. They're going to phase out cavalry,
right?
And they're going to start mechanizing. And there's a few teething problems with this, because actually at the time tanks aren't actually a direct replacement for cavalry. They're a different capability.
Yep.
And just to exemplify that, by the end of World War One, each British tank company had realised that they had to put their company commander on a horse, because that's the only way he could get from tank to tank and actually communicate with them. So there wasn't a very clear vision on actually how they were going to mechanise everyone. And what was even more complicated was that they've downsized this huge wartime army end of World War One, and they need to basically completely downgrade their military capability, because nobody wants to spend that much money on it. Nobody wants to fight a war again. So about 20s and 30s, very little, if anything, is being spent on what's first called the territorial force and the territorial army. And there's always this kind of Damoclean sword hanging over them, saying you're going to lose your horses. It'll be sometime in the future. And because they still don't want to spend any money on them, they haven't converted them, basically. Right. And the more money that they do start throwing at the armed forces in the 1930s, the more they're throwing it at Spitfire and at radar and at building escort carriers, for example. They're not going to spend it on the TA's cavalry, which is the Yeomanry. And so the Yeomanry continue turning up to training twice a month. Sometimes they bring their own horse. Sometimes if it's an annual camp, they have to, the unit goes and rents them from like a kind of agent, basically. But various prices like this.
Yep.
Sometimes they might borrow them from local hunts. It's a bit ad hoc. And the Yeomanry themselves are in the TA for the social life. Very alcoholic.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, big time. When I was in the TA, it was very social. The Yeomanry in particular were notoriously social. We'll use that as a euphemism. When we were at Nijmegen, for example, I mean, the main thing that got us around was just beer and alcohol. And the 1930s Yeomanry were like that, but even more so. Yeah. And they did exactly the same sort of hour, exactly the same training regime as I had done from 1999 through to early 2000s. And so I recognized a lot of these kind of strands as I was reading, as I was reading through the regimental histories, etc., these memoirs. And there's there's a line from one of them where an ex-Yeomanry officer says, to be a Yeomanry officer in the 30s was not a military strain, but it was a constitutional one, because all the effect the alcohol had on him. And so that was Yeomanry. And nobody joined the Yeomanry, particularly in 1939, expecting to fight on horses.
Right.
And what's fascinating about the subject is the different perspectives. So you've got the perspective of the authorities, who don't ever anticipate sending horsemen into war.
Yep.
The soldiers, I suppose the horses inevitably as well, and various other kind of strands of authorities as well. Because the authorities, again, will convert them somehow, somewhere. They just haven't got the time or money to do it yet. The Yeomanry officers are local gentry. Most of them have known each other since childhood. They've been sort of fox-hunted together since they were 8, etc. Occasionally, a Londoner or a city boy might join them. And then you've got the ordinary soldiers. And until 1938, not many people were joining the TA other than for social reasons. From 1938, suddenly lots of funding goes into the TA, and lots of guys realise, hang on, we're going to get drafted when war comes. So a lot of them start joining the TA units like artillery, signals, yeomanry, because they don't want to get drafted into the infantry. Right. They don't want to end up in the trenches. So for that reason, you get a lot of very switched on young men joining the yeomanry as troopers. And when the yeomanry, for example, did a big recruiting drive in 1939, they had lots of very well qualified lads. They were bank clerks, plumbers, all sorts of tradesmen, electricians, you name it. People with trades, people who were skilled, people who were dynamic, who had never been on a horse before and no intention of being on a horse. And they joined basically just because they assume these units will get converted.
Yeah. But
when the balloon goes up in September 1939, they don't get converted. And not only do they get mobilized as yeomanry, but the standing order goes out in case mobilization, break glass, here's the plan.
Yeah.
To compulsorily purchase 7,800 horses to go for 7,800 soldiers, which means you have purchase agents from the civil service, themselves know nothing about horses, wandering around the countryside with 40 quid compulsory bank orders saying, right, you've got a horse, we're taking it, here's 40 quid, no argument, it's going to the army. And some of these horses are pregnant. Wow. So some of them, they're 20. The purchase agents know nothing about the horses, and yet this kind of it's a kind of amorphous blob of everything from milk nags to race horses. Right. And the Duke of Portland's Hunter, for example, they all end up in October, October 1939, month after the war actually started, at these yeomanry units dotted around mainly southern England. And you've got this mounted division, 1st Cavalry Division. And the authorities' view is, what are we going to do with them? Oh, yeah, we mobilise them with horses. Well, they don't want to keep their regular units out in Palestine, modern-day Israel. The whole area was first was Palestine, because they want them where they can be useful, i.e. fighting the Germans in France when the time comes. So they decided basically to swap them, and they'll send out the yeomanry. Italy hasn't joined the war at this point, France is on the side. There's no threat to Palestine. There's local problems because the British very bloodily and ruthlessly put down an Arab revolt in the 30s. There was a vicious fighting then. So there are soldiers are needed there. They reckon the Yeomanry can do it. And from that purely military point of view, that's logical because cavalry had been used so extensively in World War One, and the ground suited itself well and all the rest of it. So the Yeomanry go out, and over the next year or so, some of them get re-rolled. Some become coastal artillery, some become this, some become that. But you still got one or two regular units there too, who haven't quite yet been mechanized. And they've set up, for example, a cavalry officer training unit, mounted cavalry officer training unit out in Palestine as well. And Churchill gets wind of this when he comes to power, and he's furious. And he's furious that, quote, these units have been fooled away. He says they deserved a man's part in this war, and they shouldn't be tied to horses. He's absolutely furious about it. And he orders the Middle East Command basically to immediately convert all the Yeomanry units. And they nod and go, yes, sir, and don't do it. Some of them they convert, but some of them they actually hide from him. They rename 5th Cavalry Brigade to something else. They move them around a bit. And in fact, one of the mechanized squadrons actually gets rehorsed 6 months later because they do actually still need particularly horsemen for that northern Palestine border for internal police work. And also they don't have the vehicles. And there's no point dehorsing a brigade of cavalry. They haven't got anything to replace them with. They're just going to be more infantry because actually the cavalry are more capable than infantry in the sense they can move further.
Yes.
They're very good for reconnaissance. So that's essentially how they end up in Palestine. So that you go back to the and press button slides.
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question here? Hold on, I gotta find it. Where'd it go? From Robin. Who are you in the photo?
In the one on the left, and where we're in combats at 9 Megan, I am third from the right. Looks like I got a giraffe neck because the t-shirt had just kind of dropped down. This is just after we'd finished, and we were kind of swaying on our feet slightly at that point. We just walked 120 miles in 4 days.
Yeah.
And we'd had 2 hours worth of drinking since it finished as well. That's a long time ago. And then in the one on the right, I'm the one posing in the tartan trews on the right.
Yeah, perfect. That's what I figured, but I just wanted to.
Right. Yeah. So posing and alcohol abuse is actually a big part of Yeomanry. It still is. We're probably more professional now, I suspect, now that I've left. What you see here are photos of the Yeomanry in the 1930s. So you've got that's a rugby team. And actually, they continued with all of this when we went up to Palestine. There's reports of hockey matches, football matches, rugby matches, cricket matches, bit of boxing. The officers were able to go jackal hunting. They brought foxhounds out with them. And one of the units brought out 20,000 shotgun cartridges because of the duck shooting in the Hula Marshes. Okay, They continued to be very sort of Yeomanry-esque. And as I say, you've got a really wide range of yeomen. If you press the button again, there's nothing. So that's some of the officers posing. I think they are. That might be in England actually because they're all still in their woolies, and it looks quite grassy. Press it again. That there is the then 18-year-old Bruce Hobbs, who won the 1938 Grand National, aged 18. And he was one of the lads who volunteered to go into the Yeomanry because, again, he knew a lot about horses, so it'd be easy enough when he joined. And he also assumed that he wouldn't be on horses very long. And he ended up fighting the British Army's very last mounted action in July 1941 against Vichy Drew's cavalry. Next slide. And if you just keep pressing, what you see is a collection of books flying across the screen and photos. And what researching this book resulted in really was stumbling across these kind of not stumbling across, but kind of, I suppose, rediscovering these strands of historiography, because there's
Right.
always been, I think, a very vocal tradition that at World War I, for example, was fought by incompetent generals, typically cavalry generals, and that has been steadily broken down by the professional historians. But what remains of that, the residue of that, is that cavalry were useless in World War I. And that wasn't actually properly really refuted thoroughly until 2011. Although there were some very good histories, like essays, I suppose, and some quite niche areas. But the first really systematic deconstruction of that was 2011 with David Kenyon, Horseman's No Man's Land. He established actually they had a very profound tactical importance where they were used properly, but there weren't enough of them to actually make an overall impact.
Right.
But what their relevance to this is that a lot of those NCOs in particular, many of whom had been commissioned in the Great War as cavalry officers, were still under arms with the Yeomanry. And they'd actually gone back to being senior NCOs, and they were kind of recommissioned again in 1939 and 1940. So there was a lot of expertise actually in the Yeomanry. And the Yeomanry's role, basically, by the time they go into war, is a reconnaissance screen. Photos you see here, on the top right, you've got a photo of the Kelly Gang, who were Australian mechanized troops who were converted to horses in the middle of the campaign, because vehicles actually couldn't do an awful lot on some of those really rocky hillsides.
Right.
Infantry couldn't move fast enough. Horses were perfect. And so they actually needed more cavalry as the campaign went on. And that's that photo on the top right. That's the Kelly Gang, who were, I think, like 50 of them. They were mechanized. The vehicles were working fine. But these guys had been sort of Australian Yeomanry, light horse, in the interwar years. They knew how to ride. They'd captured a bunch of horses from the Vichy French. So they stuck on the horses and had them doing reconnaissance on horseback instead of their vehicles. And then top left, that's a picture of Polish lancers, which is what, again, it's one of those kind of enduring myths, this idea that the Poles used lancers to charge tanks, etc., which isn't true either. And so, yeah, so that's the kind of academic background to it. And you move on to the next slide. Keep going.
Come on.
That should disappear. Yeah, so we're back to the Yeomanry. Just keep clicking, and again, we so you've seen these pictures already, but it's to emphasise the fact that you've got, to reintroduce to the guys doing it. You've got this mixture of townsmen, many of whom had only joined in April 1939, and therefore, given that they were part-time soldiers, by the time that the war started in September 1939, many of them had done a grand total of 20 days training or less. And are now operationally deployable. And they didn't know anything about horses before that started. And now they're on horses and they're operationally deployable. And the horses don't know anything about being in the army either. Most of those horses are actually, most of them have come from the hunting fraternity who surrendered them voluntarily. But there's an awful lot who just simply aren't fit. Some of them are pregnant. And it's very serendipitous mix. I say it's not quite serendipitous, but it was a weird mix. And lo and behold, it turned out they're actually very useful a couple of years down the line. But they were mobilized despite military logic, I suppose, apart from the fact that they didn't have enough of a mechanized capability for close reconnaissance. And therefore, actually, they had to have some cavalry because aircraft couldn't do close reconnaissance and close protection. There weren't enough vehicles for that, and so they did actually have to keep some cavalry. We just weren't expecting to have to use them. It was like in case of emergency. But anyway, they moved them out to Palestine, have them policing, and then when we're in Palestine, they get trained up basically. Go on to the next slide. I'm going to go off a little tangent to describe the embarkation journey because there's a few very interesting anecdotes in there.
I'm sure there is.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reason I dwell on this is because it typifies, I think, the lack of expertise. Most of them go out just as a group of, they're getting trained as soldiers on the 24 trains they had to load the whole division onto, separate from the horses. And they go down to South France, to Marseille. This is January 1940. France hasn't been invaded at this point, so they take trains down to Marseille, and they're waiting for the horses to come out to them. The horses are typically sort of a few dozen soldiers from each regiment are put in charge of 400 odd horses. They load them onto trains and take them down south, and it's a disaster because so many of these soldiers just know nothing about horses, and there's descriptions of this collection of French dockers and soldiers and any passerby they could get to help pushing and shoving and slapping, trying to get these horses loaded onto these cattle trucks. The horses haven't been on them before. They don't want to go into these boxes like that.
No.
And during the journey, in fact, one of the horses is the Duke of Portland's hunter, which is a very expensive animal. And it was given to a chap called Harrison as the kind of mobilization present, for want of a better word. And Harrison had been the stud groom at Welbeck in the war. He knew a lot about horses. Had only actually been in Yeomanry for a few months. And he was very proud of this very, very expensive animal, this kind of aristocratic pedigree, personally given to him by the Duke of Portland. And on the way down, he notices a touch of colic in his horse. So knowing that his horse should immediately be separated from the other horses in case they give him any more colic, apart from the fact he might give the other horses colic, he takes it off at the platform to give it some air. But not being very used to military and possibly not being very alert or very astute, he doesn't tell anyone about this. And the train takes off, just chunks away down south, leaving Corporal Harrison and this horse, which it's got big wart in its nose. So it's called Waterface. Waterface and Harrison left stranded in the middle of rural France, this tiny little stop. There are a few French passengers, but it's very, very cold winter. It's the coldest recorded winter in 20 years. There's snow everywhere. And he decides, well, this won't do. So he leads his horse into a waiting room, pushes out all the French travellers, and he gets a key from the station master, they do not speak each other's language, so he just demands a key. And he locks himself and his horse inside the waiting room with all the irate French passengers outside banging in the door. Harrison doesn't care about that. Harrison has to work out what to do, and he's concerned about his horse. So what he and his horse need to keep up the cold can only be provided in the town. So he locks the horse in again, leaving the French out on the platform freezing cold. Walks into town, buys 6 bottles of brandy, comes back, locks himself in, and he and the horse drink brandy for the next couple of hours. And when he's about 3 bottles of brandy in, the solution comes to him like a light bulb. And he remembers that His Royal Highness, the Duke of Gloucester, I want to say, is the British Army's liaison officer to the French army. And he's in France, and he has met Waterface because Harrison attended to them both in the summer. And he reckons, well, a horse this distinct with this big wart in its nose, surely he'll remember that. So keeping the horse locked in safely in the waiting room, and the pissed off French passengers banging on the door waiting to get in, he goes to the station master and demands to use the phone. And obviously this is all a plug-in telephonist, so he has to go through a series of operators, all of whom are incredulous and then just rude. And then eventually, okay, fine, I'll plug in for next person. And eventually he gets plugged into the army's communication system, and he gets His Royal Highness the Duke of Gloucester on the phone. And the conversation goes apparently, what? Yes, I do remember Waterface. And a couple of hours later, 2 specially commissioned railway carriages appear at the station with a bunch of Indian Army vets for Waterface. And Waterface and Harrison get down to Marseille ahead of their unit. And presumably the French are allowed back into the waiting room. So, and that's the journey down. And then they get to Marseille and it's disaster. Some of the horses start dying in the cold and the frost. The soldiers are furious about this, and a lot of them actually just start burning all the duck boards and the tents and things like this. Right. But anyway, they also go through a lot of rum. I mean, there's so much rum flowing. One soldier shaves in his leftover rum one morning. They get on the boat and they end up in Palestine. That's the picture of them on the ship just there. And then we get them out to Palestine, and they're basically twiddling their on to the next slide. They're twiddling their thumbs really to begin with. What we can do is teach horses to swim. And so, for example, the North Somerset Yeomanry taught their horses to swim in the Sea of Galilee, which is quite a tale for the grandchildren.
Yeah.
And I think they were naked there. But yeah, that's very typical. I mean, they get up to the usual Yeomanry stuff, but they are training, and there's officers, quite senior officers from the Jordan sort of frontier police,
right,
who have been operationally using horses for the last 2 decades in the area, and they start training them, and they bring them up to a very considerable operational standard, and they actually become a well-trained force. And these rather kind of chaotic, sort of lower aristocracy, gentry, rather alcoholic officers suddenly have to sharpen up, and the teenage soldiers who went out as privates with them are suddenly getting very well trained, and they pick up the training very, very well. And the horses get trained. The ones which are too old or are pregnant just get shot, but the ones which still fit for service are used. And that, as I say, that sees the yeomanry fit for standard by and large by the start of 1941. By this point, the war's going badly in the Middle East. Battle axe has failed. Greece and Crete have fallen as well, and most of the military resources have been stripped out from Palestine, for example, to support these endeavours, and it's gone badly. And they've lost thousands of men captured in Crete and in Greece, for example. Lots of kit in battle axe in North Africa, and it's gone really, really badly. Most of the division, about 2/3 of the division, has now been re-rolled, but 5th Cavalry Brigade still stands, and that consists of the Cheshire Yeomanry, who are probably the best trained at this stage, the North Somerset Yeomanry, and the Yorkshire Dragoons. And you go on to the next slide. At this point, Churchill thinks they don't exist anymore because he's ordered explicitly twice, furiously, that they be re-rolled. Yep. The officers are finally competent. Some of them have actually been sent off on sort of almost like exchange programs to go and serve in other units and have come back. So there's now a rather better kind of operational standard amongst the officers. You've also got a lot of senior NCOs now being commissioned. And whereas the tradition in the British Army was that you get shunted off to a different unit, they've been kept in the same units because they have all these years and years and years of expertise with horses. And so the leadership spine has been very much professionalized. The young soldiers, the ordinary soldiers themselves, let's say, are really well trained by this point, and the horses are now fit and of an operational standard. Next slide, please. And this is them, for example, in open lines. That's where they would not so much on exercise, because on exercise they just drink from streams, but here you've got them the usual living, just general living format. Training in Palestine, it's very hot. It's the soldiers wearing soda topies. Those are fold up canvas water troughs, which are horses drinking out of, and the horses themselves are tethered with an ankle rope, and then later on they'd get a breast rope put across their chest as well once they finished drinking as well. Next, another couple of clicks. That's Accra, where one stampede of horses charged over the walls and straight into the sea, because they would just randomly stampede from time to time. And bear in mind, not that many of the yeomanry actually knew that much about horses. Keep clicking.
Okay. So they just had, sorry, I have to ask, they were just in the center of the town, or?
Spread around. So in the case of the stampede, they were actually a couple of miles out from the town, and they were on a route march. They'd stop for lunch, and all of a sudden there's this this roll of thunder, and 200 horses suddenly go streaming through at full gallop through where the regiment were eating. They all kind of dashed to the sides, and there's trucks overturned. These trestle tables they'd set up have been overturned. A couple of horses lying around with broken legs, they just crashed into them, and most of them go tearing down towards to Accra, led by apparently this troublemaker called Jubilee, this large dapple grey. And some of the horses turn a sharp left when we get to the wall and run along the wall. Some just dive straight into the sea, lemming style. And there's nobody could explain it. There was a court of inquiry about it. There were other stampedes too, and I think it's something you could put down to. I think just this lack of understanding, this lack of expertise, because it didn't happen in war. They were too spread out, I suppose. Anyway,
right.
But in peacetime, you've got whole regiments together, whereas in war, they're kind of packaged up in small groups. Okay, keep clicking.
Wow. Okay, that's wild.
That's the blacksmiths in action. You obviously had to go with them. Yes. You had mobile veterinary units as well. Keep going. That's one of the machine gun sections with a Hotchkiss gun. So that you would get a machine gun section like that in every troop. So in every troop, you got 3 rifle sections and a machine gun section.
Okay.
You've also got your machine gun troop as well. You've got Vickers guns. Right, and in that photo, you will see the saber. You can see the saber handle sticking up just above the saddle.
Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Every cavalry soldier was still going to war with their saber. Not so much because they're expecting to charge with them,
right,
because they're there primarily for reconnaissance. But what we are expecting to do is do a lot of patrolling, miles from anywhere else, and their rifles are bolt action Lee Enfields. Everyone had bolt action rifles at the time, and the deal is that you got your point squadron, your point troop, and your point section, and your point man. And the point man is going to be the first to come up against lurking enemy hiding behind a bush or around the corner of the path, whatever it is. He doesn't have time to solemnly cock his rifle, bring it up and fire. The man behind him has probably got a few seconds time to do that, but the point man therefore has to keep his sword out in his hand so that he straight away he can lunge and thrust. And they all went through saber training. So each man went to war with a saber. They would keep rotating them: point man, next point man, next point man, next point section, next point troop, next point squadron.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Next slide.
Well, this stuff is wild. I'm just taking it all in. That's still wild to hear in this time period.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and there at one point, one of the squadrons did prepare to charge. It was they were stood down just a minute before midnight because the ceasefire had just been signed, but they were about to charge an artillery battery, which because they were using the ground skillfully, the artillery battery didn't know they were coming. That's why they were going to do it.
Oh, okay.
In this photo, you can see a horseman machine gun section carrying all its stuff. It's one of the pack horses. And then again, behind that horse, you can see it hasn't got much kit on it, but it does have its saber on. So the saber is firmly attached to the saddle. So obviously each guy's got his rifle, he's got his saber. About 11 stone of kit, give or take. No, sorry, actually, but more like 10 stone actually. Yeah. That is them watering the horses. I think that's in Militani, which is that's a major water feature in southern Lebanon, which I'll come to in a minute. Which you will start that on the next slide.
Yeah, here we go.
Right, so this is a map of the operation, basically. Basically, Wavell, CEO Middle East, has been told that Syria is a threat to Palestine. We knew that. The Vichy French are now known to be militarily collaborating with the Germans. And there's German aircraft seen there, for example. They know that the Vichy French Navy have been swapping communication codes with the German Navy as well, the Kriegsmarine. And Churchill and de Gaulle say that now is the time to take out what is now called Lebanon, what then was southern Syria. Yeah. And Wavell saying, I haven't got any men. You've taken them all off me to launch battle acts, which I didn't want to do, to send them to Greece and in Crete, which I didn't want to do. And now you're telling me, and he'd also been told to invade Iraq as well, and he didn't want to do that. And he had to use all his men for it, and he had no men left. And just as he's been kind of chest poked into this, and he's saying, and Churchill's fed up with excuses, going, stop coming up with excuses, get on with it. And Wavell kind of goes, hang on, I do have something left. And Churchill didn't know about his men because Churchill had ordered them to be mechanized a year, 6 months earlier in some cases. So the Yeomanry go into action. So you've got basically some Australian infantry, a few Brennan carriers, which are these small tracked armored cars, basically. And that's the invading force. And initially, one squadron of horsemen, they realised the planning conference is going to be needed to screen the advance and to do flank guarding.
Right.
And by the time, simply because the ground's so rough and they can't use vehicles for it, and they haven't got enough aircraft either. It was an insultingly small army with which to invade 40,000 French soldiers who had a lot of armour, heavy armour, or medium tanks and artillery. And so the original plan is to send one squadron in, and they realised by the end of that conference they're going to need a whole regiment. And then by the time they've gone a few weeks into the campaign, they realise they need more of these guys. And so the rest of this cavalry brigade gets deployed. So by the end of it, they have 3 regiments of cavalry, plus the Kelly gang, plus the Vichy, the Gaullist Free French.
Right. Yep.
Spahis as well. And they're fighting against Vichy French Spahis as well, because they're obviously doing screening for the French forces too. So that's basically what you see there is modern day Lebanon and Syria, with arrows at the bottom of the page indicating where those brigades would move up. And about a third way up, see a squiggly line, and that is the Litani River, which is quite a significant obstacle. I've lived in Lebanon. I've been to the Litani, and in places it's really impressive. And you'll see that if you click again. That is one of the valleys the Litani runs through. And click again. Yeah, that's some of the terrain. Vehicles could not operate in that terrain. They just couldn't. They could go along the valley, the valley floors, but that's really predictable, and easy to ambush. Yep. So you need troops on the hillsides, and that's the Yeomanry. And all the commanders were amazed. First of all, they had to use cavalry in the first place, and secondly, how effective they were within a few days. And they were very, very effective. And what they were typically being used for is they would get to, let's say, a village, for example. They're out on the flank. Because of the hills, like all the communication signals being cut, they can't actually really radio. And so they just act on their own initiative. And they're resupplying independently. They're basically grazing from what grass is available and watering the horses off the rivers. The soldiers are the only ones who actually need resupply for ammunition and for rations for the men. But a lot of the rations they just buy from the locals. But anyway, let's say they get into a village. What happens is probably a troop surrounds it. One section on high ground, one section goes round to the back, cuts any telegraph wires. They cover it with dismounted riflemen and machine guns, and then they send, depending on the terrain of it, a mounted or dismounted party into the village. Just check out, see what happens.
Yeah.
And sometimes that ends up in a fight. Sometimes it doesn't. One of the next bit, actually, if you could click on the next slide. No, not that one. Sorry, I thought I deleted that one.
After that,
keep going.
Not letting me go.
Hang on. No, I've lost one of my photos. Keep going back. Go back.
Not letting me go back.
It's not going to go back. Okay, get rid of that one.
Hold on, one second.
It's all right. I'll talk through it. Basically, there's if we can find it, there's a photo taken from horseback of 2 Troop A squadron Cheshire Yeomanry, and it's the guy at the back of the troop taking a photo of this column of infantry of Yeomanry, riding towards the Litani River, and the Litani River's got to be crossed because the main column as a brigade has failed to get over it. And lost heavily, and the commandos were repulsed bloodily and all the rest of it. And so the Yeomanry had been sent up to try and scout crossings, and a squadron of the point squadron for Yeomanry, and they send 2 troop up, and 2 troop come to a bridge, and obviously it's likely it's going to be covered by a French Spahi machine gun team. So they approach it really carefully, and you get first of all the 2 point troopers crossing it on horseback, obviously, and then the troop leader crosses it, and just as the troop leader's horse makes contact with the bridge, the ambush from the Vichy French opens up, and there's machine gun fire everywhere. The troop leader gallops across the bridge because he wants to get to the other side, and also that's where the best cover is, because if he goes back, he's exposed to machine gun fire coming straight towards him, and he wants to get underneath the hillside. One of the troopers on the other side gallops past him on the way back, because that trooper, according to standard operating procedure (SOP), should be with his section leader, who's back with everyone else.
Right.
And so now you've got the troop leader pinned down under machine gun fire, having just crossed the bridge with 1 trooper, and you've got the whole of the rest of the troop under heavy machine gun fire, taking casualties on the south shore on the south bank, and the machine gun fire is coming from the north bank over the heads of the troop leader. The machine gun section leader gallops through this machine gun fire, across the bridge to the north bank, because he needs to get his orders from the troop leader. The troop leader sends him and the trooper back to get a message to RHQ, regimental HQ, to say, we found the bridge, it's intact, but it's covered. And those 2 soldiers have, they don't just gallop back across the bridge, it's too risky, there's so much heavy fire, and then there's a big firefight going on at this point.
Right.
So they work their way along the bank on their horses, dive into the Litani and swim across the Litani, which is very fast flowing. And one of them, Corporal Salter, he gets washed off the back of his horse, along with the saddle, everything. The rifle's gone, the sword's gone. When he finally, he just about makes it to the other side, he drags himself onto the bank, soaking wet and exhausted. And his horse is waiting there, saddleless, because it's all been just waiting, and under full view of the machine gun team.
Right.
And he gets on and gallops away, basically. He appears at RHQ an hour later, soaked to the skin, and explains the situation to them. At that point, the rest of the squadron, the regiment rocks up. The French Spahi team have retreated at this point. Okay. And most of the regiment actually just swims across the river, which, again, vehicles can't do that.
Yep.
Obviously. And they spend a lot of time, so, when they're not swimming with Litani, they're patrolling routes that the main infantry columns can take. On one occasion, several occasions, they're hit by aircraft, and it's actually quite easy for them to get away from the aircraft because there's a reasonable amount of cover, and they can get into it very, very quickly. And also, they're quite small units, quite will-o'-the-wisp, difficult to pin down.
Right.
So they don't take many casualties from aircraft. Most of their fighting is done against dismounted Spahi machine gun teams. And then later on, as it gets more congested, they get involved in either just fighting through, they tend to move up on horseback and then fight through positions on foot, but then they also do fighting on horseback, where, for example, there's one action where there's artillery, infantry, mechanized infantry, and some light tanks. And then you've also got a mounted section of Yeomanry going up the flank. You've got a dismounted section moving up behind the armoured cars. And because obviously they're mounted, they can move around the battlefield quick, and then they can dismount and use their rifle. And essentially they're very useful for covering either retreats, because at one point there's a big counterattack and there is a retreat involved, and they're useful for screening and probing ahead of main column advances. And they get more and more capable as the campaign goes on. And the final mounted action is fought by the C Squadron of the Yorkshire Dragoons, who are ambushed by, I think it's about a regiment, no, it's about a squadron, I think, of Drew's cavalry, who almost completely outflank them, and they basically had to fight back. and they kind of leapfrog back with one troop firing at a time. Sorry, two troops firing, one troop moving. So and they obviously they remount to scuttle back, dismount, fire, cover the others, etc., etc., which is a well-established military procedure that is on horses to move.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's as good a flavour as any of it, really. And if you put the slides back up onto the second last one, that's the Kelly gang. Keep going. That's Trooper Mullen with two of his horses, and this is off Twitter. This is Royal Lancers mounted on the Polish border, operating with the Polish army, because horses are useful in that terrain. The reason cavalry were a crucial part of this campaign and were hailed for it was because the terrain was too tricky for anything but horses to use. And in fact, at the end of the campaign, they didn't disband the cavalry. They wrote up a new doctrine for them. Wow. And that doctrine was because they were expecting a German invasion through Syria. They were assuming the Germans were going to be more successful in Russia that year.
Oh, okay, right. Yes,
through Iran and through Syria. Yeah. And so they trained up Yeomanry to stay behind saboteurs. They gave them lots of mortars, for example, and their role was to operate behind German lines in the Syrian hills and be resupplied by airdrop. Now that didn't happen because at the end of the year, the Germans hadn't achieved the objectives everyone thought they were going to achieve. So, and then they had a desperate need for signallers. They had at that point in March 1942. That's when the Yeomanry got re-rolled and dismounted.
And were they just re-rolled? You said to like artillery and things like that, signals.
Yeah, a lot of them got turned into signals because of the desperate need for signallers.
Yeah.
Some of them, quite a lot of them actually, got re-rolled into 10th Armored Division and became tank. Some of them fought as infantry at Al Alamein, and that's the men. The horses were either given to the local mounted police, or they were shot, or in a lot of cases they were trained to pull general service wagons and used in Sicily and Italy. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Particularly, I talked about that. I don't know if I talked about it. Yeah, we did a bit, and I talked about it on World War II TV.
I've just seen a comment from Paul Knighton. Oh, hello again, Paul. About his father being regimental trumpeter with the Yorkshire Dragoons, and obviously he would have been pretty busy because they had to use their trumpeters to communicate when you've got a whole regiment or whole squadron swimming across the Litani River, and the radio signal isn't reliable. You've got to communicate, and so the trumpeter we kept very busy.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense given the terrain as we saw those photos. I mean, sorry, the dog is woken up. Right. Yeah. I mean, here, hold on. Probably like it better if I take him out. Come here. We got a last minute Muggins cameo. Getting bigger, everybody. Very upset. So yeah, calm down, boy. Anyway, that terrain I think it speaks to it so much about this and how it's still being used, and I don't know, it's a fascinating thing to me. It's just one of those wins I don't understand. Yes, hello, as much as I'd like, but it's a special appearance. Yes, sorry everybody. I thought he'd make it, but we got 53 minutes out of him. That's pretty good for a 3-month-old pup.
That is pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, so if there's any questions real quick, we can do those. I think we've covered most of them. But yeah, this is just fascinating to me, just taking it all in. Sorry I didn't jump in as much, but it's just still learning this stuff and how these things still have a modern application. To me,
it was fascinating researching it. And I received a lot of help from people. I mean, anyone connected with the Cheshire Yeomanry was very helpful, giving me war diaries. And that actually, I might move to the last slide just as a token of thanks. One of the most helpful voices was that of Chris Seaton, who was squadron leader of what is now what was Cheshire Yeomanry, is now C Squadron Yeomanry. He very sadly died a few months afterwards, but he wrote the forward to my book, for example. Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much to people such as Chris. There are lots of people out there such as Chris. And then you go back a bit.
You want me to go back?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm doing this. I'm not right-handed. I'm right-handed. Holding the dog.
Yeah, I reckon that photo probably capture. You've got these very inquisitive-looking horses and this very proud trooper next to him, and the bond between the soldiers and the horses was very, very powerful. They were when the horses were mobilized in October 1939, because a lot of them came from hunting families who cared very much about their horses. But they often put little when they were handing over to the army, they attached little notes to the bridles. One said, for example, "This is Rufus, age 7, can be handled in and out of the stable by a child. Please be kind to him."
Yeah.
And in March 1942, when the horses were being taken off the cavalry, be taken to the remount depots, the soldiers were weeping on the horses' necks, and they also attached little notes to the horses' bridles and halters, things like saying, "Please take care of him, please be kind to him."
Yeah, that's amazing. Because I just, again, everything's from from the First World War context, is how much the connections with the horses and everything like that. It's something you don't hear about too much from the Allies' perspective, anyway.
Yeah.
In the second, yes, calm down, bud. From the Second World War, right? Because it's largely mechanized, other than other smaller things like war dogs.
Yeah. I mean, also remember there were I think there were 2 million horses in the Soviet army.
Yeah, and the German
a lot
army.
of them were transport, but a lot of them were cavalry too.
Yep.
And the Soviets, Germans, and the British, continued to rewrite their doctrine for them as doctrines as they went through the war. They didn't get rid of them, apart from the British. But I mean, the Germans and the Soviets kept using them and kept rewriting their doctrine.
Settle down.
Because they still needed them.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense given the circumstances and the lack of mechanization, particularly in the German army. It makes perfect sense. But it's, like I said, again, it's interesting to see how there are still modern applications of this. Because, Poland's not a place you think of, popularly, that would have difficult terrain that would rely on things like horses. It's still fascinating how this still has an application today.
Absolutely. I mean, marsh, for example, and also just lack of roads in some places.
True. Yeah, so I don't think we have any questions. Sorry, I'm just going to shift my dog here. I'm having trouble with my left hand. Hi, Muggins. Settle down, bud. Still very young and wild. Yeah, so thanks, Jonathan, for coming on. I appreciate it. I don't know if Muggins did, but he seems pretty happy now that he's out of his crate. So the book is linked down below if anybody wants to check it out. If you can get your hands on it, check it out. This is a fascinating story. We only kind of scratched the surface here. I mean, getting into these details and talking about a river crossing and under fire on a horse is just, you want a story, there's a story. You know what I mean? So it's crazy. So thanks for coming on. Did you enjoy coming on the channel?
Absolutely. And the book is available on Amazon or direct from the publisher Helion.
Yeah, I will add more links after. I only just got one on there, but I will add more. And I'm getting bitten. I think somebody wants to go downstairs. So thanks again, Jonathan. Thanks for everyone for watching. Yeah, settle down. So everyone keep up for sorry. I used to have to wrangle a dog at the end here. Stop biting me. Keep an eye on the channel for things coming up, because I'm going to try to plan more as much as Muggins will allow. Okay, so thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.
Bye.